differently via Desh Kal Patra. This is very important. What would happen to an American, how he would react to a particular situation, and how an Indian would react, obviously is different. Okay, we know all that. Similarly, I feel the planets make us react also. If I'm not being wrong in my articulation. The next topic Sam is going to do in the coming weeks in the paid Guru Purnima webinar is a very controversial topic on the birth chart of USA. Okay. K.N. Rao Saab takes Gemini ascendant. Many other people take the 6:30 p.m. time, okay, which is Sagittarius ascendant. Okay. Now these are all recent things, and of course we know astrology. We can make you can fit the logic as you look at it, even on a wrong data. Some of you saw yesterday and even 3 days back when I did a live prashna. Okay, the location was wrong, but the prediction was correct. It has happened to all of us thousands of times. Okay, it has happened to all of us. Instead of putting AM, we put PM in the time, and still our predictions go right. Okay, which shows the somewhere down the line we are not predicting, somebody else is predicting. I always believe somewhere down the line there is some guidance somewhere. Okay, or maybe we are fitting too much in. But anyway, he has worked hard on a research of an old astrologer called Sibley. He's now modified it further. And you must attend that lecture. Okay. You must attend that lecture to understand how USA, how to look at a mundane chart. One. Okay, that's what she's going to teach. Second, the history of USA. Is it matching with the natal chart, natal yogas, as per Sam Geppi's rectification? Okay, that's what you got to learn. Okay, it truly doesn't matter whether Sam Geppi is right or K.N. Rao is right or somebody else is right. What matters is what you can learn from each astrologer. Here, Sam Geppi, how he goes about looking at a chart, that is very important. Because we are used to Indian astrologers and their thinking. And here comes a fresh mind. He's been guru to so many people. Okay, I remember Kapil Raj telling me that he used to watch, I don't know if I can quote that he used to watch Sam Geppi's videos and make his.
Okay. He said it publicly many times. Yeah.
Oh, he said that. Okay.
Yeah.
So, my association with Kapil Raj was in somewhere 2015, 16. But after that, I've not been in touch. But, he's done good work and he's been inspired by Sam. That shows how old Sam Geppi is and how instrumental he's been in shaping up the young astrologers. Anyway, without
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Most welcome. Without taking much time, I have been unfortunate that due to my health and various other commitments, we have not had Sam Geppi in our channel, YouTube channel. And in future, I'm going to rectify it after my surgeries get over, okay, 3 surgeries or whatever. So within a few months, I hope I should be up and running and gymming also. So you're going to see a lot of Sam Geppi, and I am going to promise you one thing. The interview that I do with him, the series of interviews, would be those questions that you as a student have had for all the gurus. All the gurus, from the most stupid questions, I'm going to act like your messenger. I'm going to ask the most stupid questions to an experienced astrologer, including what lifestyle is needed for being a Vedic astrologer. Let me just can you unmute yourself, Sam? Just make Sam Geppi the host, co-host. 1 second, Sam, I'll just rectify it in a second. Yeah, now you would be able to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Got it. Yeah, I'm here.
So all yours, Sam. We're going to have the one and only Sam Geppi for us. All yours.
All right. Thank you. Well, Sunil, John, that was a great intro, and I feel very honored to be here. And I'm here sitting in San Diego, California. Here it's 10:45 on July 1st, and so I'm happy to be coming into Mother India there on Guru Purnima. And I just want to share my screen. Someone needs to allow me to share my screen. I'm not able to.
I'm your co-host. 1 second. You should be allowed. Nitesh, Girish.
I'm actually not co-host at this point. Yeah.
Have you rectified it, Nitesh?
So I
Okay,
did.
yeah. Yeah, okay, we got it now. Oops, wait a minute. Not that one, sorry. New share, bio, this one, share. Can you see it?
Yeah.
You can see my screen?
Right.
Okay,
Yes.
good. So I want to just start with a quick bio here, in case people don't know, because I don't know how much people know me. But I have done, even though I'm a Westerner, I've been doing Vedic astrology since 2003. And I have written a couple books. You can check them out. One is called Yoga and Vedic Astrology. Another is called The Ascendant. And particularly for people in India, Yoga and Vedic Astrology is now available in India through the Art of Living store, Gurudev. Sri Ravi Shankar Gurudev published my book in 2018 because it, very closely mirrors the traditional classical Sanatana Dharma, Sankya philosophy. In Yoga and Vedic Astrology, it starts with all of the Sankya philosophy, Sanatana Dharma, and then it gets into the Bhagavad Gita. We study that through, just through the structures of Sankya philosophy, and then the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So that's about the first 100 pages, and then we get into astrology. So I really feel like Indian astrology, Vedic astrology, whether it's in the East or certainly in the West for sure, it's lost a connection to the Vedic part, which is the Sanatana Dharma, that we're all spiritual beings that have descended into form. And that's really the basis where everything starts. And it's very important, even when we're looking at retrograde planets or whatever it is, to understand the spiritual essence that is not localized, that is not specific, and is not revolving around the ego and the separate self, that everything is referring back to that balanced state of God's love and dharma and truth, and all the planets, planetary forces, grahas, are all benevolent forces. They're all different facets and faces and moods of the Divine Mother. It's just certain lessons are a little harder to learn than others. But, and so, our karma is very dense in the mind. So this is just a quick bio here. I also taught Dr. Treya Shiva Baba, who's also known as Dr. Pillai, his first certification course through Astroved University. I taught in 2009, 2010 also. And again, he's got a lot of astrologers there in India, in Chennai, but he wanted me to teach it because it was very classical Indian, but sort of modernized. So I think you'll find, if you don't know my work, that I do bring a very modern take on, but it's very classical Indian. In fact, because my background, I started doing meditation and yoga in the early 80s, in like the mid 80s. So I didn't start studying astrology till almost 20 years after I had been doing yoga and practicing meditation. So I did found the American Academy of Vedic Art and Science in 2011 after my guru, Sri Mata Amritananda Mai Devi of Kerala, also known as Amma, gave me her blessing. And I've been teaching Vedic astrology certification levels 1 through 3 since 2010. My website is vedicastrologycenter.net. So we're going to be talking about this is a course that I taught on retrograde and combust planets. This is a manual from that course. When we talk about retrograde and combust planets, we have to realize they're really sort of ubiquitous in astrology. Most people have retrograde planets. I also put the combustion in here. I'm not going to talk that much about it, but they're really different facets of the same phenomena. It's how close the planets are to the Earth and to the sun. So just real quick, in this diagram, all the planets would be retrograde because they're closer to the Earth. Retrograde. In this diagram, all the planets would be combust because they're furthest from the Earth. They're on the opposite side of the sun. So retrograde and combustion are really two facets of the same phenomena, so to speak. And by the way, it's really quite overlooked because the combustion part is also pretty subtle. And it's really, in fact, quite opposite. Again, and it's opposite because the relationship of the planets to the Earth is opposite. In one, they're closest to the Earth, which is retrograde, and in the other, they're furthest from the Earth, which is combust. And when they're combust, their rays are coming through the sun, and the sun is like blasting them at us. When they're retrograde, the sun is over here, and they're closest to the Earth. And because they're closest to the Earth and the different speeds of the planets, they appear to be moving backwards. Some of them, it's because the Earth moves faster. Others, it's because they move faster than the Earth. But still, the phenomena is the same. And these planetary conditions connect the planets to the sun and the Earth and refer to the speed of the planets, which is called Chestabala. That's one of the aspects of Shadbala. So as it says, one is furthest from the sun and lacking in confidence. That's the retrograde. One very easy way to understand retrograde as the interpretation is that because our life on Earth is moving at a certain speed, like right now, things are moving at a certain speed, but the retrograde planet, whether it's in the natal chart or if it's in the sky, is not moving as fast. So it's kind of like if you're in a car, like the phenomena is like, let's say that you're driving in a car at 60 miles an hour and you move past someone who is going 30 miles an hour, that person looks like they're moving backwards. They're not moving backwards. It's just that the car you're in is moving faster. So they appear to be moving backwards. Now you might say, okay, that's interesting. But what if that person in that car going 30 miles an hour was part of your, let's say, party? Like you're going to they're part of your family and you're going to you have to get on an airplane, right? And you have to get there on time. And they're not moving fast. They're sort of not keeping up. Well, you're going to have to keep looking at them. You're going to have to keep checking in the rearview mirror to see where they are. You'll be worried that they're not keeping up because they're not keeping up with the speed of the rest of the things in your life. And so that concentration, that focus is really how you can look at retrograde planets, let's say in someone's natal chart. It's something, first of all, the phenomena is the planet was very bright in the sky. When you look up in the sky, the retrograde planet is brighter than it is at any other time because, as you can see, it's closer to the Earth, right? When it's the outer planets especially, now again, inner planets, Mercury and Venus, can be combust and retrograde. Probably not going to have time to go into that too much, but especially the outer planets, they get very big when they're retrograde. And by the way, Venus also, when they're before she becomes combust, also gets very bright. And they also get bright when they stationary retrograde. When they go stationary before they go retrograde and they stop in the sky, we're starting to see this with Venus now because it's starting to go stationary retrograde and it stops and it starts to get bright. Its magnitude gets very bright. So when the planet is retrograde, it's furthest from the sun, which is also what you would call a sort of indicator of confidence. And it's moving backwards relative to how our life is moving. And so we have to keep paying attention to it. But the fact that it's moving backwards and our life is moving forward makes it also quite an introspective force on the very purest level, on a cosmic level, especially on the level of a caraka. What the planet rules as a caraka, like Mars for courage and siblings, Venus for relationship and agreements, Jupiter for inspiration and purpose, Saturn for being determined and working through difficulty even though it's hard, Mercury for discrimination and communication, etc. Those things become introspective forces where they don't, because they don't flow as easily externally, we have to stop and pay attention to them. Like I said, we have to keep checking on it. And by doing so, they become a very powerful internal force. And they can be a very, what you might call, spiritualizing factor, because again, the spirit world is really internal, not external. We're very external and we're very material, especially in this capitalistic world, we're very material. And the spiritual realm, though, is internal. And so these retrograde planets become internal factors. And I really think people should start looking at them in a more neutral way and not expecting that they're going to be, quote, bad or whatever. In fact, in Vedic astrology, they have this very high Chesta Bala for the very reason I'm talking about. In Western astrology, for example, retrograde, it's considered bad, bad, bad because of the interruptions. Now, it does create interruptions, and I'm going to be specific about how they interrupt, but try to see it more with more neutrality, not with so much judgment, like, oh, retrograde, bad. Well, it's bad for some things, so to speak, but in being bad for something, it's good for making you pay attention to it. Another way to look at it is, I use the example of, let's say you come home and you have a key and you open the door. Every day we sort of mechanically open the door. We sort of stick the key in, we never look at it, we turn it, and the door opens. But let's say there's that time when you stick the key in and it doesn't go in, like something is jammed. Then you suddenly, because it gets interrupted, you stop, you examine the key, you look at it really closely, you look at the lock, you start examining and really paying attention to that thing, because your typical normal function gets disrupted. So when things get disrupted externally, it makes us concentrate on them and pay attention to them. And retrograde planets will tend to do this. When they're in the natal chart, that'll be a sort of quality of our relationship with that planet. And I'll skip ahead just conceptually, with that planet as a karaka and as a house ruler, and the living karaka, like the living thing that it brings, like Venus, relationships, Jupiter, children, Mars, siblings, let's say, for example, and the things that it rules as a house ruler. Like, for example, if we're talking about Leo, Jupiter also rules the fifth house. If we're talking about Scorpio, Jupiter also rules the fifth house. And I have a couple case studies to show how, so the living karaka things that the planet produces gets disrupted, either both as a karaka, an indicator, a natural indicator, and as a house ruler. But the things that the planet rules on the subtle level become enhanced because of the interruptions, because that external thing doesn't flow so easily. We have to find that essence within ourselves. And the external disruptions are like sticking the key in the lock and it doesn't work, and then you got to pay attention to it. So let's say the retrograde Venus, the external disruptions and the inability to make agreement, or the confusion and lack of confidence, like I said, about not being able to make good agreements, for example, wakes us up and makes us alert and say, oh yeah, and so, thereby we learn that Venus thing with much more skill. The Mars retrograde, let's say, whereas we normally just kind of push through things with our willpower, Mars, I'm going to, what do I do? Okay, I do this. And we just kind of push through. When he's retrograde, it's like we lack confidence. Well, I'm not sure how to do that. And I try to push through and then I lose. So now what? So we become a very skilled warrior because of the failures. Sometimes nothing fails. One of the best ways to succeed is to fail, because when you fail, you learn why you failed. And the retrograde planet has this quality on a consciousness level, or on the level of consciousness, the pure nature of the planet. Because as you can see here, especially when we examine the astronomy, which is very important, a lot of astrologers are very disconnected from the sky. They look at, and astrology is just a piece of paper, but look at the way the planets are arranged. And the grahas are the form of Lord Vishnu. It says in Brihad Parashara Horasastra, Lord Vishnu has taken form as the 9 grahas to bestow upon the living beings the fruits of their karmas, to establish dharma and to destroy ignorance. The grahas, these are the facets of Lord Vishnu. we get so preoccupied with trying to get what we want while we're incarnated that we forget that we have a pure relationship with these energies. Jupiter is guru. It's guru. That's the name, guru. So when Guru is retrograde, and then all we do is complain about not having a lot of money, we're missing the point, right? And Venus is Shukracharya, teaching us how to find beauty, joy, happiness authentically, and how to elevate that beyond just our desires, beyond just the ego and its needs. So again, when it's retrograde, all we do is complain about, oh, when am I going to get married? And we miss the deeper lesson, because the deeper lesson is transcendent of our desires in this lifetime. So again, you want to think about it on that higher level as well. And again, I'm going to get into more specifics, but the concepts are very important. So again, you understand that retrograde it's somewhat lacking in confidence because the speed of the planet isn't keeping up with what we're doing in life. So that makes us question it. We have to keep checking on it. Come on, are you keeping up with with the things I want? No, okay, I have to keep checking it and examining it. And so you can see this example here. I have this sort of diagram. This is sort of why the planets look retrograde here. This is one with Mars. The inner planets are faster, so they kind of do it differently, but it still shows that retrograde motion. So what we want to see here, though, is that as it says here, this phenomena is similar to a slow moving car. I already said that, having observation. The innate quality of the retrograde planet will be important and developed internally. So the innate quality, that nature is a karaka, as well as the psychology of the planet. Again, psychology is internal, how it feels. In fact, we're much more psychological about that thing and really reflecting on how it feels, because externally it might have messed up. So we're like, well, why? What's going on? And it can be quite an internal reflective thing. However, the things in life ruled by the retrograde planet as a house ruler and organic living karaka will not unfold so smoothly. Again, those are the things that get interrupted. Internally, it can be very close to our heart, so to speak. Think of the retrograde planet you have and how intimate that planet feels to you. And also try to imagine the day you were born. Like, let's say you got that retrograde Mars, especially if it's like really opposite the sun. That day when you looked up in the sky, Mars was big and red, man. People would have been like, wow, look at that. It's breathtaking. Notice when Venus goes retrograde, we're all going to talk about relationships and all this stuff, but just look up in the sky and marvel at the beauty of it. Jupiter, when he's retrograde, my Lord, it's gigantic. And Jupiter is so far away. He goes retrograde 4 months out of the year. Saturn is retrograde almost half the time. Jupiter is retrograde about a third of the time, right? And so we're meant to be reflecting on those things a lot. Saturn, we're supposed to be reflecting almost half the time on the things that we're committed to. It's really a nature of Saturn. You see Saturn retrograde a lot. I have it. A lot of people have it. And it's very natural for Saturn to be retrograde, again, about 5 months of the year, Jupiter about 4 months. Again, with Jupiter retrograde, we're meant to be reflecting and being introspective about our teachings and our gurus and what's guiding us and giving us inspiration. We're meant to be reflecting on that and bringing it into the heart more. By the way, this is why you see Guru's exaltation point in Cancer, because it's our heart is supposed to be infused with Guru's grace and divine love. And obviously it's very auspicious here on Guru Purnima to be, feeling that and to be living at. So there's a lot that can be examined about even the retrograde cycles and how long the planets go retrograde. But again, to make very specific predictions and to understand very specifically what happens in natal charts, you want to know that it's this internal reflective quality that the person works through. It can be a very intimate and very spiritually empowering force. And again, this is based on a lot of factors. Of course, the dignity of the planets. We're going to see a case study where we see 2 Jupiter retrogrades in very different dignities. Also, the functional nature of the planet. This is probably the most important thing, and often the thing that gets overlooked is the functional nature, which means, does it rule positive houses, or is it a functional benefic or a malefic? All of those things are still there. The retrograde is one thing, but it's part of a lot. But all of those other factors show how how comfortable the person is with the retrograde motion. But some people, again, Scorpio person with that retrograde Jupiter, that's one of the case studies. Jupiter is their Dharma planet. In fact, it's their most auspicious planet. So Jupiter goes retrograde. It can create all kinds of upheavals in their life. But underneath it all, it leads them to something that feels very organic and holistic and spiritual to them. Other times, for example, like with Libra, where Jupiter is a functional malefic, the retrograde doesn't feel as good to them, but it's still going to bring them closer to Guru and make them very philosophical. It's just that those things are harder for certain signs to integrate, for example. But that's a universal principle. You shouldn't ever think if we're examining one thing that it cancels out all these other things, right? Sometimes there's this idea of, well, what if it's this? Well, what if it's that? Well, that's all still there, right? We're examining this one thing, though. So again, as an organic living karaka will not unfold smoothly, this is because our life on Earth through form unfolds in a linear fashion, like I already said. Or you might say life on Earth, time moves forward to our bodies, right? Time is just moving forward. Retrograde planet is moving backwards, like I said. So for example, Jupiter retrograde for Libra ascendant will be developing wealth, wisdom, etc. These are sort of Jupiter things, although there will be quite a lot of confusion and readjustment in those areas of life. These are all traits of Jupiter as a non-living karaka or indicator. However, Jupiter is the karaka of children and teachers, living things. And for Jupiter ascendant rules the 3rd house and 6th house. Thus, the Libra natives with retrograde Jupiter may have difficulty with siblings, acting with courage and will, again, because Jupiter rules the 3rd house. Experimenting and trying new things. Again, the 3rd house is opposite the 9th house, where we're trying to make sure that our teachings make sense and trying new things and trying to figure those things out for ourselves. Also managing debts and expenses, that's the 6th house. These are all traits of 3rd and 6th houses. So the qualities ruled by a Jupiter as a house lord will be compromised when retrograde. So again, you just want to understand that really the things that the planet produces as a living karaka, a living indicator, and that literally means like the people that it would produce, and also the houses that it rules, and of course the people that would be associated with that or whatever, those things become sources of confusion because that's what it's trying to produce and bring into our life on Earth in this body at this time that's moving forward at this speed. Well, all those things that we're trying to get this planet to produce, it ain't keeping up. So we have to keep going back and redoing it. And so again, this is a manual from a course that I taught. I just want to show you real quick here. This is part of about a 15-hour course that I taught. If you want to go to this website, movingforwardwithretrograde.com, and again, it's a very detailed page. And when you go to pay for it, if you put 50 off retro, you can get $50 off on that course through the end of the weekend and like into Guru Purnima. But this manual is part of that. And again, I want to get a couple case studies and then show a little bit more. Well, first, let me show, this is some from the manual here. But moving forward with retrograde planets. So again, the planets as karakas, just to make it, very formal. Mars is the karaka of, again, siblings, competitors, and strength. So again, when he's retrograde, he's actually eventually bringing more strength because of the confusion, because it's not unfolding very smoothly. So sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, we're not sure, we hold back. That actually brings authentic strength, which is more internal, mental, and not about just fighting all these external battles, right? Mercury, others in general, and associates, really about discrimination, and that includes things like, obviously, communication, but it's really about, when he's retrograde, we're really sort of confused about how to just, how to make sense of things. Often we go back and forth. Is this right? Is that right? Mercury's where we're trying to figure things out, really, and then speak it to others. Speak the things that we figured out, and it's like, I'm not really sure. But eventually it strengthens that function. Jupiter is about teacher, children, those who inspire us, and he's really about meaning. So in Jupiter's retrograde, it takes a while, and our faith can be challenged. We're really looking for higher meaning and purpose, but it's not coming so easily. Like, for example, we might be born in a certain religion, but it doesn't really resonate, etc. Those kinds of things. So we have to reflect on it. So that sense of meaning and purpose gets disrupted. And of course, don't segregate this. This is what children are as well. If people have no meaning in their life and they have children, all of a sudden they have some meaning, right? This is why these carakas work. After the children grow up, we have to find meaning in something else. So we find our meaning in God. This is the elevation of the 5th house to the 9th house, and Jupiter is the karaka for both. But again, these things are all integrated. Venus, of course, is lovers, beloved, those we want to share our happiness with, but it's mostly happiness. And the agreements that we make in order to get our desires met, the things that we think are going to make us happy. When Venus is retrograde, we get those agreements, they're more confusing. We give up more than we should have given up in order to get the happiness that wasn't as good as we thought it would be. And I'm like confused. I don't know how to get my needs met. I don't know how to I want this from you, but you're asking too much. I don't know how to feel good about my agreements. So again, what that eventually does is it's trying to make us reflect, introspect, and learn how to make those agreements, right? And again, just to sort of plant the flag again, the real specifics of the interpretations also come based on the houses that these planets rule and based on their dignities and their strength. It doesn't negate that. In fact, that allows you to make the specific prediction. Yes, you're going to have these things go crazy, but it's going to lead you to higher faith, or you're going to have these things be disrupted. Let's say if it's Jupiter, and it's not. In fact, you'll wind up being cynical and bitter and lacking hope. It could be either one, but it's going to bring the introspection. Or like with Venus, all these relationship issues, if Venus has a lot of problems, it might make the person learn that they can't do it and kind of shut down, or they learn how to do it more skillfully, but the issue is the same. And again, that's why you start doing very specific work to make the prediction specific, which we have a few charts to look at. And Saturn is like old people, authority figures, those beneath us, also, just time in general. Like I say, Saturn especially, Saturn retrograde most of the time, again, he's retrograde almost half the time. So probably about, I would say, 5 out of 10 people here have him retrograde because he's retrograde almost half the time. And again, it's very normal for Saturn to be retrograde. A couple case studies here. Am I doing okay with time, John?
Go ahead. Don't worry.
Yeah. I want to hit a few case studies here, and then we can take a few questions if people have them. But retrograde and combust stories, I have a few here. First, the current president of the United States, Biden, very interesting and good case study here with retrograde planets. His wife and daughter were killed. Problems with kids in general ongoing. One of his sons died of cancer. The other child right now is been very much in the news, Hunter, who has drug problems. He also just recently, I think he either got indicted or he has some legal problems as well. So Joe Biden has had 2 kids die. One when they were very young in a car accident, another got sick fighting in the war, and a wife die when he was younger. And the other child is, has drug problems. He also has another daughter where hasn't been any issues. But we see classic retrograde Jupiter up here, and this is for Scorpio ascendant. Again, it's also highly exalted, right? Almost exact degree. So again, this brings in a lot. I'll get to the Saturn retrograde in a second, but first, if we look at the children, because it's very, very clear to see this, that again, it's also in the 9th house, it's aspect in the Lugna, all kinds of things where you could see his faith has really grown by going through these terrible issues with his children. Joe Biden had just been elected to the Senate when his wife and his daughter were killed. Not only that, but now he was a single father, and it devastated his 2 kids as well. He could have just given up and been like, okay, but he pulled through it, and his faith really got him through. And even though it's been very hard, again, and then he loses another child later. But just look at the nature of how children and problems with children has dominated his life. Children die again, and his life revolved around his kids. His son, he said that his son Beau Biden, who died in the war, was like the most honorable man he ever met or whatever. Like, he was like best friends and most connected. The closest person ever maybe to his life was his son, who then wound up dying. And by the way, Biden was going to run for president of the United States in 2016, but his son had just died not too, wasn't that long ago. And he said he just didn't have the heart to do it. Like, he couldn't muster it up. He was so devastated. But again, this is a man who's lost 2 kids, and he has another child who has a lot of problems. And we see this retrograde Jupiter. Now let's look at the difference though between that and, now again, he also had a wife who was killed. We can see Saturn retrograde. Now again, Saturn is a functional malefic for Scorpio as well. And it's in the 7th house, of course, of partner. And one of the phenomena as well, again, in the course that I did and all of that, you have to look at the houses where the retrograde planet is, of course, as well. It's the 3rd and 4th house lord. You may not realize this, but it's also very important to know that the 3rd house ruler is also a very vicious death bringer, because it's the 8th from the 8th. And people who have looked at a lot of death indicators or death charts or people dying, you can see the third lord, and even malefics transiting a 3rd and whatnot to also be a portender of sudden and shocking death, because it's the 8th from the 8th. So again, the 3rd lord is also a very cruel planet for any lugna. So this is not just retrograde Saturn. Again, a lot of us have it, but for Scorpio, Saturn is also maybe the most vicious malefic. Saturn and Mercury, but Saturn is really the one you like to not see. However, and again, I didn't actually get into the combustion, but I can jump here real quick. With the combustion, it actually winds up energizing planets. Again, it's quite different than the retrograde, which brings confusion, can bring loss. Many times, in fact, with combustion, this planet, this Venus, was behind the sun. So look, he lost his wife and that child, when he was younger, but then it wasn't that long after that he met another woman. He met his current wife. And I mean, Jill Biden, she's beautiful. She was smart. So he got right back on it. This Venus is very empowered. The Venus is combust. He's not confused about that. Let's put it that way. His children wound up being a huge source of confusion with this Jupiter retrograde. Saturn, again, the retrograde Saturn in the 7th house showed an accident that took the wife, but his Venus being combust, and it's very combust. It's exact. It's less than a degree. It's actually what's called cazimi in Greek astrology, the way the Greeks looked at it, and it's very, very active. So he wound up finding another woman pretty easily. He didn't, shrink from that. So just the difference between retrograde and combust, he's got very good power and very empowered with females, but with the kids, the major source of confusion and pain and loss, but it's also elevated him and it's given him deeper faith. This is a person here. This is a private client. He's an entrepreneur, issues with greed and self-expression. And one of his quotes, he literally said this to me, was, "I'm really good at making money in bad ways," which is a big thing with him. He was very much trying to aspire to higher consciousness with his commerce and ethical commerce. And he has, by the way, because the dasha shifted and very amazing stuff. He's also a very brilliant man. And through our consultations, we talked a lot about this Rahu Jupiter retrograde here, and his making money in bad ways, because you could see that, again, Jupiter is a retrograde here. And you have to understand, Jupiter, if nothing else, Jupiter can make us want to expand financially. And we often experience Jupiter energy. It's what's inspiring us and what we're working toward, what's getting us all fired up. And a lot of times it's actually money. It's the blessing that can come through having money. But if we don't elevate that into something that's more eternal, and where our big aspiration in life isn't to just make sure I have more money, but that we're inspired by, again, connection to God, to Guru, then we can get then it can really spoil its effects. I'm also saying this because you should understand when someone has a powerful Jupiter, you shouldn't just say, oh, they're very spiritual. No, they also can make a lot of money, and they can get lost in the world of money. There's a thing that says we're either pursuing God or money. And sometimes it's hard to pursue both. We can pursue both. We're not meant to, live this noble, impoverished life, and we can have it all. We can have those things, noble, commerce, and, but this is an example of someone where this retrograde Jupiter, it rules his 9th house and his 6th house because it's a Cancer ascendant. And so, again, he also got into trouble with debts and all of these other kinds of things. It's also, of course, it's joined Rahu. There are other things that make this difficult. I'm going to show this case study, and I'm doing this case study now. I actually did a video on this recently because it's also what's called a recurrence transit. We're about to have Venus go retrograde now. The last time it went retrograde was back when this happened, when Donald Trump first burst on the scene in 2015. And what happened in particular is there was this controversial statement that was made where Donald Trump said Megyn Kelly had blood coming out of her wherever. It was this very controversial statement, and people thought this was going to end him. I remember when it happened. In fact, I predicted before that if he got, because I could see when he came on the scene that Venus was going to go retrograde in his first house. And if he could get past Mercury going Venus. If he could get past the Venus retrograde in his first house, going from Leo to Cancer and then back through Leo again, if he could navigate that, then he could be very formidable. But that was going to be very difficult. And I predicted before that I actually thought it would sink him. By the way, I was wrong, obviously, but in any other situation, it would have sunk any other politician, what was coming. And because then he said all of this stuff. There was also, by the way, something where there was a report in the biography of his wife that he'd raped her and all. There was all this stuff that came out, very Venus retrograde stuff happened. And now in 2023, well, first, let's look at the chart, but this is when it happened back then. So this is how you can see the transits as well. And this is a recurrence transit, which means every 8 years, Venus comes back to the same, almost exact same degree that it went retrograde 8 years before. So again, in 2015, this is where Venus went retrograde. Again, this was when the news report happened, August 8th, but it was actually said a few days earlier. So this isn't at the exact moment, but Venus had gone retrograde. It was like 3 degrees. It was like right on his natal Mars and right in his ascendant. When it goes into his ascendant, then all these problems with women, these retrograde problems, which usually would have sunk any other candidate. They would have either gotten out of the race, they'd have said, oh, okay, and they wouldn't have been able to handle it. He just kept going forward. Well, the same transit is happening now. Now in 2023, Venus is going to go over his natal Mars again. Mars is his 9th lord, and there are numerous indictments and lawsuits. Now Trump is in vicious legal trouble right now, and Venus is about to go over his Lagna again. Now, again, the thing you want to understand is when you're reading retrograde, not just in the natal chart, but also by transit, you always consider the functional status of the planet to the native. So Venus for Trump is always, whether it's in the natal chart or by transit, it's the 3rd and 10th lord. Again, 3rd house is the house of ego and will and desire. It's the first Kama house. And the 10th house is the house of course, impact, career. In his natal chart, he has, I'm sorry, I have this picture over here. He has Saturn and Rahu, I'm sorry, Sun and Rahu in Taurus, in his 10th house. So Venus is very important to him because it shows his sort of charisma and charm and his ambition, because he's got Sun Rahu in the 10th house. So transiting Venus going retrograde is also the 3rd lord, the 10th lord, going retrograde again in his first house and going over his 9th lord. This is the important thing right now, is the legal trouble. So we see the same recurrence transit. Again, these are a few ways to look at the retrograde planets. I talked about the natally and the principal. I showed the difference with the and the contrast relative to the combustion, but also by transit, they're hitting parts of our chart. And you always want to consider the functional nature of the planets as well. They never stop being that. For once you incarnate, your relationship with all those planets are set. I have a Gemini ascendant, so no matter where Jupiter is, it's always my 7th and 10th lord somewhere, even if it's in the sky. In my natal chart, it's that, my Venus is the 5th and the 12th lord, whether it's in my natal chart, whether it's by transit, retrograde, whatever it is, that's your relationship with that energy. So whatever your ascendant is, your relationship with all the grahas are set up based on that. By the way, I wrote a book on that. My first book, The Ascendant, by the way, breaks that down in great detail, because this is also something that it's such a deep and important principle that gets glossed over. So I don't want to take up more time. I think I've gone as long. I mean, it started late for me. We sort of going a little bit, but I want to end right there, at least with my presentation. And I guess there's time for questions or whatever, if people had them, or whatnot. And again, I will just go back again, though. This is a manual that you can get, again, from the course, where I actually go over every sign. For example, I go over every planet for every sign. Retrograde Mars for Aries is this. Retrograde Mercury for Aries person is this. Retrograde Jupiter for Aries is this. So I break all the stuff down in that course that I talked about, where you can go, you can get a discount here, but we really have to understand these things with relentless precision. And once you make that leap into understanding that that your ascendant, or the ascendant of the person you're reading, it's not just one sign. It's that point in relation to every other point. And that sets up all the house rulers. And then that matrix is built into everything that you're looking at, whether it's their natal chart, where the planets go, the Raja Yogas, which are very important. It sets all that up. And it sets up the retrograde cycles, whatever's happening in the sky. Like if you're for example, we looked at Trump's chart there, and it's not just that he's got this Venus retrograde going through his first house. If you know where the planets are right now, you also know that Rahu and Jupiter are in his 9th house. He's actually got Rahu and Jupiter going through his 9th house right now. So it's his 9th house because that's where they are. And Jupiter for him is also his 8th house ruler because he's Leo. So you always read transits personalized to someone's ascendant anyway. And so again, Jupiter is also about to go retrograde in his 9th house with Rahu. Get ready. I mean, there's more legal problems happening. So again, Venus is going to go retrograde in his first house over his 9th house ruler when Venus turns retrograde. And then Jupiter is also going to go retrograde at the end of September. And Jupiter right now in the sky is in Aries with Rahu. So again, this is just 9th house is legal problems. So you can just see legal problems for him at least through next April, because Jupiter is going to keep going through and Rahu is still there. So Rahu is going to be there until December. So again, so when you start to see these things pile up, this many things pile up, then you can understand how the transits, and they work within the dashas as well. So again, last thing, when you are looking at retrograde planets by transit, not just in the natal chart, you also use the same principles. When you're looking in the natal chart, again, this is he's also got retrograde Jupiter. We looked at Biden's, but his is in the 2nd house. It's in Virgo. The dignity is not as high by any means. Jupiter in Virgo is definitely not as inspired. It's hung up in Virgo rationality and stuff like that. So he's also had confusion with children and things like that, and especially with money and all bankruptcies, reversals in his fortune, many reversals of fortune for him, particularly with all the bankruptcies and stuff. So you can see where his retrograde Jupiter, it also affects kids, but again, because it's more confused, and that inspiration and hope and purpose is not as much a part of his life, simply because that Jupiter is also not as elevated. It's hung up here in Virgo, where it's a retrograde. It actually just makes for all of the exaggeration, braggadocio, all that kind of big retrograde, confusing speech, and also literally, though, all the bankruptcies and the financial problems he's had throughout his life. The retrograde planet affects the house that it's in. Just like we saw with Biden, the retrograde Saturn, killed, took away his wife. So it looks like there's a question there. I guess I can ask to unmute you or something. I don't know. I'm sort of here right now.
Hi, Sam. Can you hear me?
Does someone want to? Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Hi there.
Hey.
Can you hear me, Sam? Oh, that's great.
Yes.
You were talking about Trump's chart. You said that Trump has Guru and Rahu badly placed in the 9th house. And I also observed that one of your clients also has Guru and Rahu, and I saw that chart. So are you saying that Trump has
his Jupiter Rahu is that's by transit. Sorry. Sorry. It's by transit. It's in the sky right now.
Oh, okay. So that's the question. So Trump currently has a Guru Chandra yoga activity. Is that correct?
Well, we all have it because because Jupiter Rahu are in Aries, but we all have there's a Guru Chandra yoga in the sky right now, and we all have it, and it's somewhere for all of us.
That's fact. I thought it was for certain people.
No, I'm talking about in the sky. So let me just say, so I'm sorry I was going kind of fast there. I was just kind of bringing some things in, but I was talking about by transit right now in the sky. When I was talking about Trump's legal problems, you see these things pile up because Venus is going to go retrograde over that Lagna. We saw the last time, and this is how you can do research. What happened the last time Venus went retrograde over his ascendant, or not just his ascendant? I just happened to notice that because we have this Venus retrograde cycle coming up, and I know that they're 8-year cycles. So I went back and said, okay, the last time it happened was the summer of 2015. And that jumped out at me because I remember the summer of 2015. I remember that was the summer that Trump came up, and then I'm like, oh, I wonder if that was right when that thing with the blood coming out of her. And I know because I've been doing this a long time. I remembered I made the prediction if he survived the Venus retrograde, and I went and looked, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right when it happened the last time. So again, you can see how Venus going retrograde through his ascendant. It would be interesting to go back and see 8 years before that. That would have been 2007. What happened to him with his finances or something in 2007, because Venus would have went retrograde through his ascendant then as well. So the last time it brought up this big controversy. This time it's going retrograde in his ascendant, and it's on his 9th lord. And again, this is what you have to look at. This is what I was saying. I know I sort of was going a little fast here, but this is Trump's chart. And so last time it went over his ascendant, but now it's also going over the ascendant. Look at the exact degrees. Venus retrograde 2 degrees. This was in 2015. That's where it's going to go retrograde now, or in a couple weeks. And his Mars is at 3. And again, you have to read the rulerships. Mars is his 9th lord. So now Venus is going to go retrograde in the sky over his 9th house ruler. 9th house is legal system. It's courts. It's the law. It's what's happening. So the last thing you would want to see with someone who's got all these indictments and all these legal problems is a retrograde planet going over their ascendant and going over their 9th lord, particularly if it's a functional malefic, which is what Venus is. Again, you want to understand something. You want to, when you're looking deeper, this is why I said rulerships are everything. People can say, oh, but it's Venus. At least it's not Saturn. No. Venus is a functional malefic. It rules the 3rd and 10th house for Trump. The 3rd lord is a cruel house ruler. It's not a beneficial planet for him. By the way, the Jupiter is. So maybe the Jupiter retrograde, I don't know. I have a hard time thinking it, but Jupiter is going to be aspecting his ascendant. It is aspecting his ascendant. It's with Rahu. Maybe the Jupiter retrograde over his Lagna might bring some help. I don't know. One might interpret that, but it might reverse some of the trouble, but I don't really think so, because the planet's also aspect by transit. So we got quite a few questions here. I want to be aware of the time because these are now going over very long. I don't know how much time I have.
Yeah, I understand.
We'll quickly take Nisha Yadav. Thank you, Sudarshan. We'll quickly take Nisha Derishil Yadav. Kindly unmute yourself. Or can you have your camera on, please?
My camera is on.
Yeah, great.
Hi, Sam. In your research, what's your opinion about this retrograde planet scheme results of the previous house? have you seen it working, and how you normally tackle that? Because it
Yeah.
then
So you just
creates a
interpret it.
picture of six
Yeah, so it's
houses.
part of the interpretation. By the way, again, let's be clear. This is one of the reasons why it can be very devastating for a Leo person, because it's going from your first house to your 12th house. It's going from the first to the 12th house of loss, of letting go of something. Now, again, by the way, the last time with Trump, he survived it, and actually, I don't know if to say it made him stronger. I don't think it made him stronger, but he hung in there with it. And what happened is we learned that it didn't really matter. So again, you're always looking at the houses. So what's your ascendant?
Gemini.
Gemini. Okay, it's the same as mine. So it's going to be going from your third house to your second house. So Venus is going to go retrograde in your third house, which is about interests and, again, using your intelligent mind to try to figure things out. And it's going to go back into your second house of values, which is the bedrock of your interests. So values produce interests. Values are like from the family, but then we have our own interests that aren't part of the family. So again, understanding how one house leads to another is also very important. So when planets go retrograde back from one house into another, it's mainly the houses that you want to look at because they show the specific effects in our life. Then that's what the interpretation is. And by the way, this is the interpretation. I do readings now, and when it's really prominent, I'm saying, so this Venus retrograde cycle that's coming, it's going to be affecting your third house of interest back into your family. So you might see some sort of toggling between your interests and what you're interested in and like what your family thinks is right, or even maybe like your money, spending your money on these interests instead of whatever it might be. So that's
that previous house activation happens when the transit retrograde, the planet retrogrades in the transit, then it starts giving the previous house result, or it's always
I'm having a little hard time. I'm having a little hard time understanding what you said.